Welcome to today's lesson, adding two mixed numbers. Today we are going to discuss how you can rename fractions so that you can easily add two mixed numbers. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to begin today by practicing adding 2 1/4 plus 1 2/3. Our first model that we're going to use is the area model. So let's represent 2 1/4 as a fraction. We have 2 wholes, and then we have 1/4 of a whole shaded in. Now let's represent 1 2/3 using fraction bars. We have our 1 whole and 2/3 shaded in. So how do we approach this problem? We have different size pieces in fourths and in thirds. Well, in order to solve this problem, we need to rename our fractions so that they have common denominators. That means we need to change these fractions so that the pieces are all the same size. So how can we do that? It's actually pretty simple. I know that 4 and 3 are both multiples of 12, so I'm going to try to create a common denominator of 12. In order to get this, I need to multiply my numerator and my denominator by 3. 4 times 3 equals 12, and 1 times 3 equals 3. Let's try this for 2/3. I know that I want to have my common denominator of 12. So 3 times 4 equals 12, and 2 times 4 equals 8. So now I have renamed 1/4 to be 3/12, and I've renamed 2/3 to be 8/12. So we now have the same denominators. Well, let's see, what does that look like with our fraction bars? We now have 12ths as our denominator, which means we have 12 pieces in each of our fraction bars. Now notice that we did not change the amount we had shaded in, we just changed the number of pieces. So now I have 3/12 in blue, and I have 8/12 in green. Now this makes it a lot easier to add together. Let's count our wholes together. 1, 2, 3. We have 3 wholes. Now let's count our 12ths. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11 12ths. 2 1/4 plus 1 2/3 is equal to 3 11 12ths. Let's try a word problem together. Omar drove 8 1/6 miles to school. He then drove 3 4/9 miles to the library. How many miles did Omar drive? Let's start by setting up our problem. We begin with 8 1/6 miles that he drives to school, and we will add that to 3 4/9 miles that he drives to the library. All right, our first step is to find a common denominator. In order to do that, we need to find a number that 6 and 9 are both multiples of. That's right, we can use 18. If we multiply 6 times 3, we get 18. That means we also have to multiply our numerator. If we multiply 9 times 2, we get 18, which once again means we also have to multiply our numerator by 2. But wait! Why do we need a common denominator again? It's important to remember that we're adding fractions together. And when you change the denominator of the fraction, you're changing the size of the piece that it represents. So if we're trying to add fractions together, we need to make sure that we're adding the same size pieces by using the same denominator. All right, let's continue on. We always add our fractions together first. So we have 3 plus 8, which equals 11, and our denominator stays the same because we're just adding our pieces together. The size of the piece isn't going to change. Now we can add our whole numbers together. 8 plus 3 equals 11. That means that Omar drove 11 11/18 miles in all. Let's try another word problem together. Lucy needs 1½ cups of flour and 2 1/8 cups of sugar for her cookie recipe. Her bowl will only hold 3½ cups of cookie mix. Will her bowl be able to hold the flour and the sugar together? Well, let's see. We need to start by adding 1 and 1/2 cups of flour plus 2 and 1/8 cups of sugar. Now our first step is to find a number that 2 and 8 are both multiples of. Well, actually, we know that 2 is a multiple of 8. So we're going to have a denominator of 8ths, and we're going to multiply our numerator and our denominator by 4. 1 times 4 equals 4, and 2 times 4 equals 8. So now we have a common denominator, and we can go ahead and add. We need to add 1 whole plus 2 wholes, which equals 3 wholes, and 4/8 plus 1/8, which equals 5/8. But we're not quite done yet. Her bowl can only hold 3.5 cups of cookie mix. Is 3.5 less than or greater than 3 5/8? Well, let's see. I think we need to rename 3 1/2. To turn our half into 8ths, we need to multiply our numerator and our denominator by 4. And that gives us 4/8. 4/8 is less than 5/8. That means that her bowl will not be able to hold the 3 5/8 cups of mix that she's going to create. Let's go ahead and review what you've learned in today's lesson. When you're adding mixed numbers together, your first step is to make sure that your denominators are the same. If they're not, you're going to need to rename those fractions to create a common denominator. If we have 4 2/5 and we're trying to add it to 3 1/4, we need to rename each of these fractions. So we need to find a number that has 5 and 4 as a multiple. We're going to use 20. I can multiply 5 times 4 to equal 20. I can multiply 4 times 5 to equal 20. So now I have renamed both of these fractions so that I have a common denominator of 20. My next step is to start adding. You always start by adding your fractions first. 8 plus 5 equals 13, and I'm going to keep my denominator 20ths because again, I'm not changing the size of the pieces, I'm just adding them together. Now we can add our whole numbers. 4 plus 3 equals 7. Great job!